My daughter-in-law spent 14 years convincing my son I was a bitter old man who never loved him. And by the end of it, they had cut me out so clean, I didn't get a phone call when my own grandbaby learned to read. Then the steel shop I'd bled into for 40 years sold for $22 million. And I bought a glass and cedar house on a bluff above Lake Michigan to spend whatever time I had left listening to the water. The very next morning, before I'd even unpacked my coffee mugs, a rented box truck came grinding up my gravel drive, and the two of them climbed out grinning like nothing had ever happened and said, "Hey, Dad, we figured we'd move in. You've got way more house than one old man needs." They thought I was lonely. They thought money had softened me into a fool with a checkbook. They had no earthly idea what was riding in the back of that truck, or what I was about to do about it. If you've ever been written off by the very people you'd have died for, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments what town you're watching from. My name is Dale Stroud. I'm 68 years old, and this is the truest thing I've ever told anybody. I was standing in my new kitchen, which still smelled like sawdust and fresh paint, when I heard the truck. I'd been up since 5. Old habit. You don't run a fabrication shop for 4 decades and then learn how to sleep in. I had my coffee black, my reading glasses pushed up on my head, and a stack of unopened boxes I kept meaning to deal with. When I looked out the big window over the sink and saw that orange and white rental rocking up my drive, my first thought wasn't even fear. It was just a tired, sinking recognition. Like seeing a storm cloud you'd been promised wasn't coming. I went to the front door and opened it before they could knock. My son got out first. He looked older than 43. His hairline had crawled back, and his shoulders had a stoop in them that a man his age shouldn't have yet. The stoop of somebody who'd been carrying something heavy and shameful for a long time. He wouldn't meet my eyes. They gave me a little wave, palm low, the kind of wave you give a stranger you're not sure you should talk to. My daughter-in-law got out of the passenger side like she was stepping onto a red carpet. Same as ever, hair done, sunglasses worth more than my first car, a smile so wide and so cold it could have kept fish fresh. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She just looked past me, up at the cedar beams and the 2-story windows, and I watched her do the math in her head, the way an appraiser walks through an estate sale. "Well," she said, breezing up the steps and brushing right past my shoulder into my front hall, "you certainly kept this little secret, Dale. My. There's enough room in here for a whole army." I didn't move out of her way. She moved around me. That's the thing I want you to understand. In her mind, I was furniture. And then I saw the third one. Hanging back by the truck, half hidden behind my son, was a girl. My granddaughter. The last time I'd held her, she was a toddler with grape juice on her chin. And now she was 17 and so thin her wrists looked like they'd snap if you shook her hand too hard. Her face was the gray-white of dishwater. She had dark hollows under her eyes, and a cheap hoodie pulled up even though it was a mild morning, and she was shivering. When she looked at me, what I saw in her face stopped my heart cold. It wasn't shyness. It was fear. The bone-deep kind. The kind a child should never have learned. "Grandpa," she whispered. That one word landed somewhere under my ribs and stayed there. I looked at my son. "What's wrong with her?" "She's just run down," my daughter-in-law cut in fast. Too fast, waving a manicured hand. "A little bug. She needs a soft bed and a quiet house, that's all. You wouldn't turn your own flesh and blood out in the cold, would you, Dale? Even you aren't that hard." It was a trap, and I knew it the second she said it. She was using that sick, scared kid as a shield, betting that an old man with a soft spot would let his anger get outvoted by his decency. And God help me, she'd read me right, because I looked at my granddaughter swaying on her feet, and I felt the fight drain out of my arms. "Get her inside," I said. "Just her. Now, Dale. She comes in. You two can wait." But the girl wobbled and grabbed the porch rail, and I'm not a monster, so I stepped back and let all 3 of them through my door. And the moment I did, my daughter-in-law's perfume rolled into the house and drowned out the clean smell of cedar I'd paid so dearly for. And the peace I'd had 10 minutes earlier was just gone. like it had never been there at all. My son hauled box after box into my foyer, dragging them across floors I'd watched them sand and finish 2 days before, and he never once asked permission. My daughter-in-law was already in my living room, running her hand along the back of a leather chair like she was deciding whether to keep it. "Real leather," she said. "Look at you. All those years smelling like a welding torch, and you were squirreling this away the whole time? Did you hit the lottery? Or did you finally rob one of those rich clients you were always complaining about?" I let it go by. I looked at the clock on the mantel. "You've got 30 minutes, I said. She turned. "Excuse me? 30 minutes? 30 minutes. To tell me where the two of you have been for 14 years. To tell me why I shouldn't pick up the phone right now and have you removed from my property. If I don't like what I hear, you're back in that truck. All of you." My son flinched and looked at his wife. He always looked at his wife. She just laughed, a tinkling little laugh with no warmth in it, and dropped onto my couch like it was a throne she'd been away from too long. "You're being dramatic," she said. "We're family. Family helps family." Here's what I didn't tell her. Standing there in my own front room with my fists going white, I didn't tell her that the man she was talking down to had built a company from one rented welding bay and a pickup truck into the largest structural steel fabricator between Chicago and the Sioux. I didn't tell her that a national outfit had written me a check for $22 million 18 months ago, and that I still sat on the board, and that I hadn't gotten there by being soft or slow or anybody's fool. She looked at my calloused hands and my flannel shirt, and she saw a lucky laborer. That mistake was going to cost her everything, but she didn't know that yet. So I just nodded, slow, and let her think she'd won the first round. "Fine," I said. "One night. For the girl. We'll talk in the morning." I gave them the 2 guest rooms down by the kitchen. I took my granddaughter up to the room nearest mine, tucked her in under a heavy quilt, set a glass of water on the nightstand, and asked her, quietly, if she was hungry. She shook her head. Then she grabbed my sleeve with a hand that was all bones and said, "Grandpa, don't let them." And then she stopped herself, looked at the door, and went silent. Whatever she'd been about to say, she'd been trained out of saying it. I went down the hall to my study. It's the one room in that whole big house that mattered to me, because it's where I kept the deed, the bank papers, the new will I'd just started drafting. I locked the heavy door with a brass key, and then I keyed a new code into the smart lock on the private wing, standing square in the doorway so my daughter-in-law, who I could feel watching from the bottom of the stairs, couldn't see the numbers. The date I sold the shop, easy to remember, impossible to guess. Then I went into my bedroom, threw the deadbolt, and turned on the security monitor on my nightstand. I'd had the whole downstairs wired before I moved in, cameras with microphones, the kind I used to install in the shop to catch which crew was smoking near the gas lines. I pulled up the living room feed and I watched. The second they thought I was gone, the masks came off. My son sank into the couch and put his head in his hands. He pulled out his phone, stared at it, and the look on his face was pure terror. My daughter-in-law didn't comfort him. She didn't go check on her sick daughter. She walked straight down the hall to my study, tried the handle, found it locked, and crouched down to look at the keyhole like a thief casing a vault. I turned the volume up and heard her hiss. "He's hiding it in there. The old fool. Did you see his hands shake when he locked it? He's losing it. Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks and I'll have power of attorney signed. And after that, this house and every dime in his accounts are ours." My hands were not shaking. They were steady as a vise. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark and I did not feel like crying. I felt like a man who'd just been handed the blueprints to a building he intended to tear down. They wanted 2 weeks. I decided right then I'd give them their 2 weeks. It would be the longest 2 weeks of their lives. The next morning, I came down to find my daughter-in-law standing in the middle of my kitchen in a silk robe, snapping her fingers at a housekeeper I'd hired 3 days earlier. A kind woman with arthritis in her knees, who was near tears trying to keep up with breakfast orders for people who'd invited themselves into a stranger's life. There was enough food on the table to feed a job site. My son was already eating like he hadn't seen a meal in a week. My granddaughter sat at the far end, picking at dry toast, making herself as small as a person can make themselves. I sent the housekeeper upstairs to rest and poured my own coffee. "You treat people decent in this house," I told my daughter-in-law, quiet. She scoffed. "That's your problem, Dale. You don't know how to run a place like this. You'll let the help walk all over you. It's because you spent your whole life being the help." Then she glanced out my big window at the bluff and the water and said, "That old maple's blocking the best of the view. You got tools, don't you? Maybe take it down before the party crowd starts coming around. We'll want to entertain." The party crowd. The entertaining. In my house. On my money. I set my cup down and said, "Sure, I'd go take a look at the tree." I didn't go near that maple. I walked clear out to the edge of the property by the old boathouse where no microphone of mine could pick me up. And I called the one man on this earth I trust without a single reservation. Dewey ran my shop floor for 22 years. He's 71 now, still strong as a fence post, and he answered on the second ring. "They came, didn't they?" he said. He didn't even ask. He'd warned me for years that the minute they smelled money, they'd come scratching at the door. "All 3, I said. "And it's worse than I thought, Dewey. They think I'm senile. They've already got plans for the house. And there's a kid in the middle of it who's scared half to death." "What do you want, boss?" he said. "You want me to come down there with a few of the boys and make them disappear?" "No," I said. "Too easy. I want to know exactly what they've done. And I want them to feel it when it comes apart. I need you to do me a favor. I need you to be a phone call." Dewey is a smart man and he caught on quick. The plan was simple. They thought I had money, but they thought it was lottery money, easy money, the kind that could vanish overnight. So, I'd let them believe it had. 10 minutes later, I came stumbling back onto the patio with my hair mussed and my phone to my ear, shouting loud enough for the whole house to hear. "What do you mean, frozen? Both accounts? The brokerage and the savings? Dewey, that's everything that isn't tied up in this house. How am I supposed to make the property tax?" A pause, while Dewey on the other end made grim noises about the IRS and a margin call and a lawyer's retainer I couldn't pay. "I know it's not your fault. I know. Just call me the second you hear anything." And I hung up, and I let my shoulders drop, and I sat down heavy in a patio chair with my face in my hands, an old man with nothing left. I watched my daughter-in-law through the glass. I watched her go very still. I watched her lean over and whisper something fast and ugly to my son. And I knew, in that moment, that if they'd come here out of any kind of love at all, she would have come outside to comfort me. She didn't. She went upstairs, and I found out that night on the camera feed exactly where she'd gone. She'd gone to her bag, and she'd come back down with a small amber bottle, and she'd held it up to my son and said, in a voice flat as a frozen pond, "If the money's tight, then we move faster. We can't wait for him to come around on his own. There's enough in here to keep him groggy through a signing. He won't read a word of what he puts his name to. My lawyer can have the papers drawn by Thursday. And here is the part I will carry to my grave." My son did not say no. My son did not stand up. He did not say, "That's my father. You are not going to drug my father." He looked at his shoes for a long moment, and then he said, "Okay, but we do it quiet." I turned off the monitor. I sat in the dark for a long time, and whatever last, foolish, stubborn little ember of hope I'd been keeping alive that my boy still had something decent left in him, it went out. Just like that. Cold and gone. And in the empty space where it had been, something else moved in. Something patient. Two things had to happen before I did anything else. And I want the folks in the comments who always ask, why didn't he just call the cops right away to hear me out? Because I did call them. I just didn't do it the dumb way. First, I got the child out of the line of fire. The next morning, while my daughter-in-law slept off her wine and my son sat staring at his silenced phone, I told my granddaughter we were going into town to get her medicine. That part was true. I took her to a doctor, a good one, who looked her over and told me she was malnourished and run ragged and badly needed someone to actually take care of her. And on the long drive back, with her wrapped in my old coat and the heater running, she finally told me everything. They were broke, past broke. My son had run through their savings, then run up debt, then run up worse debt, the kind you don't get at a bank. He owed a man named Brunetti out of Detroit $600,000, and Brunetti was not the kind of man who sends a polite letter. Brunetti had come to their old house. Brunetti had a son, a hard case named Dominic who'd already done 2 stretches inside, and Brunetti had told my son that there were ways to settle a debt that didn't involve cash. He'd looked at my 17-year-old granddaughter when he said it, and my daughter-in-law, her own mother, and told her to be grateful, that it would take care of the family, that she should be a team player. They brought her up north to my house to keep her tucked out of sight until the arrangement was finalized. The money they wanted out of me was meant to pay off the rest of what they owed, so the 2 of them could walk away clean and start over somewhere new. But the deal for my granddaughter, that stayed on the table either way. I had to pull the truck over. I sat on the shoulder of M22 with the lake going gray and choppy out the window. And I breathed until the red went out of my eyes. Because if I kept driving, I'd have done something that would have put me in a cell. Then I reached over and took that girl's thin hand in both of mine, and I said the only thing that mattered. Nobody is selling you to anyone. Nobody is touching you. Not your mother, not that man, not anybody. You belong to yourself. And starting today, you've got me standing between you and all of it. Do you hear me? She cried so hard, she shook. And then, when she could talk again, she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Grandpa, I just want to finish school. I'm good at school. I had a 3.9 before they pulled me out. I want to go to college. I don't want their money. I just want to go back to school." 17 years old, in the middle of the worst week of her life. And what she was asking for was a desk and a chance. That's the kid they were going to trade away, so that was the first thing. The girl was safe in my truck, and a doctor had her on record, and that was leverage and protection both. The second thing took a phone call to a woman named Lena Castellano, a private investigator and former county prosecutor I'd kept on retainer for years to vet anyone who got near my business. I gave her 3 names: my son, my daughter-in-law, and Brunetti, and I told her to find me everything, and to find me the kind of everything that holds up in a courtroom. It took her 4 days. When she sat across from me at a diner in town with a manila folder, what she laid out was uglier than I'd feared. My son wasn't just a deadbeat. He had an active warrant in 2 states for wire fraud. He'd been running investors' retirement money into a crypto scheme that was nothing but a hole he kept digging. My daughter-in-law had a string of bad check charges under a maiden name, and Brunetti was already a person of interest in an organized crime investigation the state police had open. Lena slid a 4th thing across the table: the number of a detective named Ramsey, and the name of a child protective caseworker named Ms. Tran, both of whom, she said, would be very interested in everything I knew. "You don't have to handle this alone, Dale," she told me. "But if you want them caught with their hands all the way in the jar, we time it right." That's the part the cheap seats critics never want to hear. I did go to the police. I went the smart way. With a folder and a child already safe, and a recording of a woman planning to drug a man in his own house, Detective Ramsey told me, plainly, that if I let it play out one more step, if I let them bring the lawyer and the papers, They'd have a conspiracy charge that would stick like tar. So we set the table together. The trap was the law's idea as much as mine. I was just the bait. I went home and I was the perfect mark. I let my daughter-in-law see me looking tired and beaten. I let her think the frozen accounts had broken my spirit when she suggested gently, oh so gently, that I ought to think about getting my affairs in order while my mind was still sharp. That her friend Mr. Forrest Falk was a wonderful estate attorney who could come by and make sure everything was protected. I let my voice quaver and I said maybe that was a good idea. I let her schedule it for Thursday evening. A quiet dinner, she said, just family. She'd cook, she told me, with real tenderness in her voice, that I should relax and let her pour my drink. Thursday came. She made a roast. She set out my good crystal, and she poured me a glass of bourbon with her back turned so I couldn't see her hands, and she set it down in front of me with a smile like a knife. Mr. Falk arrived with a leather folio full of papers. A durable power of attorney, a deed transfer, a will leaving everything to my son. My granddaughter was upstairs, supposedly asleep. She was actually 3 blocks away in Ms. Tran's car, where she'd been since that afternoon, safe and warm, eating a cheeseburger. My son sat at the table jittery and sweating, his phone buzzing in his pocket with calls from a Detroit number he didn't dare answer. I picked up the bourbon. I held it up to the light. I swirled it. You know, I said, I worked with steel my whole life. You learn to read metal. You learn when something looks solid and isn't. When it's got a hairline crack running through it that's going to give the second you put weight on it. I set the glass down, untouched. I can read people the same way. My daughter-in-law's smile slipped just a hair. I'm not going to drink this, I said, and I'm not going to sign Mr. Falk's papers. I reached under the table and laid my own folder on the cloth, and I opened it. The crypto warrants, the bad check history, a still photo, printed large, of an amber bottle being held up in my living room, time-stamped, with my daughter-in-law's face caught mid-sentence behind it, and a transcript, word for word. There's enough in here to keep him groggy through a signing. I heard you, I said. Both of you. I heard every word the night you decided to poison me, and I have it on tape, and so does the state of Michigan. Mr. Falk stood up so fast his chair fell over, mumbled something about a conflict, and was out my front door before I'd finished the sentence. My son made a sound like an animal. My daughter-in-law's face went through about 4 different expressions before it settled on the only honest one I'd ever seen on it. Naked, cornered hate. You think you've won something, she spat. You think you're some kind of hero? No, I said. I think I'm a man taking out the trash before it spoils the whole house. That's when Detective Ramsey and 2 uniformed troopers came in through the kitchen door. Because they'd been parked in my garage for 2 hours. They read my daughter-in-law her rights for conspiracy to commit elder abuse and attempted poisoning. They read my son his rights too, for his outstanding fraud warrants, and for the part he played in arranging to hand his own daughter to a known criminal to settle a debt, which the prosecutor would later call child endangerment and trafficking, and which Ms. Tran had documented in full. And the folder Lena built on Brunetti? That went to the Organized Crime Task Force the same night. He was indicted within the month. The arrangement died on the vine because the only thing those men understand is leverage, and I had given the law all the leverage it needed. I want to say something to the people who watch these stories of mine and write in the comments that the sun always gets off too easy. You're right. You've been right every time. So this time I didn't do it the easy way. I didn't hand my boy a few 20s and a bus ticket and tell myself I'd done my part. I let him face what he'd built. He sat in the back of that cruiser with his face pressed to the window, and I made myself watch, because a father ought to look at what his son became, even when it's his own failure looking back at him. He mouthed the word "Dad" through the glass. I didn't go to him. I'd carried him on my shoulders once. I taught him to bait a hook and tie his shoes and drive a stick. And he stood in my living room and said okay to a plan to drug me, and team player to a plan to sell his little girl. There is a love that saves a man, and there is a love that just keeps a rotten thing propped up so it can rot a little longer. I was done with the second kind. The house was very quiet after the cars pulled away, and then it wasn't, because Dewey and four of my old crew came rolling up the drive in their work trucks. Because I'd called them the minute the cuffs went on, and they came stomping into my kitchen in their steel toes and their Carhartts, and they brought a case of cold beer and 3 pizzas because, Dewey said, fancy people food won't fill a working man. My granddaughter came in with Miss Strahd's tran a few minutes later, and she stood in the kitchen doorway taking it all in. These big, rough men laughing, the warmth, the noise. And then she crossed that room and threw her arms around my middle and held on like she was drowning and I was the doc. She wasn't shaking out of fear anymore. She was just shaking the way you do when you finally set down something you've been carrying too long. It's over, I told her. It's all the way over. The weeks that came after were not a fairy tale, and I won't pretend they were. There were court dates. There were nights my granddaughter woke up crying and I sat outside her door so she'd know the house was guarded. I petitioned for guardianship, and Miss Tran stood up in front of the judge and spoke for me, and it was granted. I enrolled her back in school the following Monday. A good one. The kind with a real science program. Because she meant it about college, and I'll be damned if anyone was going to take that from her again. She made honor roll by the end of the term. She put it on the refrigerator herself, and one evening last fall, the two of us were sitting out on the bluff watching the sun go flat and orange over the lake, and I told her something I'd been chewing on. You know, I said, I've got more money than I'll ever spend, and money is a strange thing. It doesn't make people, it just shows you what they already were. You saw what it did to your folks. They thought a full bank account could stand in for a spine and a conscience. She nodded, real quiet. I'm not going to just write you a check someday and set you loose with it, I said. That'd be the cruelest thing I could do to you. But I'll tell you what I will do. I sold my company, but I didn't sell what I know. I'm thinking about building something small again. A fabrication outfit, custom work. The kind of thing where you can put your hands on what you made at the end of the day. I'm 68. I'm not dead. And I could use a partner with a good brain who isn't afraid to learn the hard parts. After college. On top of college. I'll teach you to read a drawing, run a crew, look a man in the eye, and shake his hand like your word means something. You interested? She looked at the water a long while. Then she gave me a grin that I swear came straight down from her grandmother, and she said, Teach me all of it. And I told her we start with the boots, and to wear them broken in, because nobody respects a clean toe. I think about my son sometimes out there in the dark wherever he landed. I hope he finds the bottom and learns to climb off it. But I made my peace with the fact that I can't walk that road for him. Here's the thing they never tell you. The thing it took me 68 years and one terrible week to understand. People love to say you can't pick your family. That's a lie. You're born with blood relations, sure. But a family, a real one, is a thing you choose and they choose you back, and it's built out of who shows up in steel-toed boots when the chips are down, who reaches across a kitchen and holds on. The two who shared my last name turned out to be strangers who happened to share my blood, the girl on the bluff beside me, and the old crew who came running. Those are mine, and I'm theirs. And for the first time in 14 long years, sitting up there with the cold coming off the water, I didn't feel like a lonely old man at all. I felt like I was home. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It truly does help an old man out. And tell me down in the comments, was I too hard on my son, or did he get exactly what he earned? I read every single one. For a long time I told myself that staying quiet for 14 years was the same as keeping the peace. It wasn't. All it did was teach my son that a man could walk away from his own father and pay no price for it. And a lesson with no cost is a lesson nobody learns. That silence didn't protect anybody. It just gave the rot more time to spread until it showed up on my porch with a moving truck and a sick girl used as a bargaining chip. Everything that happened after, the drugging plan, the debt to Brunetti, the cold way my daughter-in-law called her own daughter a team player, none of it came out of nowhere. It grew, season after season, out of choices that were never once answered with a hard no. So when the moment finally came, I made up my mind that I would answer with everything I had, and I'd do it the right way. That meant 3 things had to live in me at the same time. And I think they have to live in you too if you want to come out the far side of something like this hole. The first is plain decency. The stubborn refusal to do an ugly thing even when an ugly thing would feel good. I wanted to put my hands on my son that night. I didn't. I let the law do what the law is for. Because vengeance you take with your own fists just makes you the next thing that needs cleaning up. The second is using your head. I didn't shout, I didn't slam doors, I didn't tip my hand. I watched, I listened, I gathered. I got the child out of the house and a recording onto a server before anyone knew I was awake. Anger without a plan is just noise. Anger with a plan is a courtroom. And the third is the one nobody likes. Because it's the slow one. Grit. The flat gray endurance to sit at a table, smile at people who want to poison you, and wait 2 more days because waiting is what makes the trap close clean. My granddaughter had all 3 already, and she was 17. Beaten down, half-starved, terrified, and still she looked at me and said she just wanted to go back to school. That's character and brains and backbone all wired into one kid, and her own parents were going to trade it away for $600,000. They couldn't see it because they'd spent their whole lives believing money was the prize. It isn't. Money only ever shows you what a person already was. Build the decency, sharpen the head, harden the spine, and you become the one thing they can never take in a moving truck.